Omniverse.
The Call of Cthulhu Mystery Program is for mature audiences only. This episode contains use of colonialist terminology for indigenous peoples and discussion of mental health crises and suicide. Please listen at your own discretion. If you find our Stygian story simply scintillating, unlock further secrets at patreon.com/omniversemedia and cthulhumystery.com/support.
I tell you what, I've enjoyed myself amidst the holiday wassailing, gorging, and gifting of the holidays, but my diet has been far too deficient in the robust flavors of jazz. Man cannot live on jingle bells alone. Christmas has come and gone, Hanukkah has waved so long, and the new year looms large. But December isn't done, friends. There's one Friday left, and that's today. So that can only mean that there's time to open one last present, this year's final entry into the Call of Cthulhu Mystery Program's Arcane advent of Lovecraftian cinema. And it, my dears, is a doozy. In this episode, you'll hear showrunner Cat Blackard, keeper of Arcane lore Luke Stram, illustrator Jarrod and Omniverse creative Doug Banks band together to face down John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. It's a film that adapts no one Lovecraftian story, but many, holding a fractured lens to them and reflecting a horrifying visage upon our own world, provoking its viewers and perhaps our listenership tonight to question their own reality. As always, if you haven't seen this film before listening, you may want to, but if you haven't the time, our hosts will indeed escort you with their discussion into this unhinged journey. All I'll caution is that if you're listening while driving, don't be surprised if the black road and the night should blend together. And do watch yourself while voyaging through the liminal spaces of the open highway, because you never know who or what you'll run into. Person, place, or your own grim thoughts. Stay tuned after this episode and I'll rejoin with you, catch you where you land, and speculate on what comes next. But now, you're leaving Radioland and losing yourself in the mouth of madness. Do you hear that? In the cruel blackness of night, an unknowable evil from beyond time cries out. What dark deeds unfold on the streets of Arkham, and which unwitting souls, innocent or impure, will succumb to the maddening call, the call of Cthulhu.
Welcome to Cthulhu Cthommentary. Hi, I'm Kat.
Hi, I'm Luke.
Hey, I'm Doug.
Hello, I'm Jarrod.
And today we are going to be talking about John Carpenter's Lovecraftian masterwork, In the Mouth of Madness, from 1994. Now, Luke and I have both seen this film before. I'd be hard-pressed to say what my favorite John Carpenter movie is, but I could very quickly tell you what the most influential John Carpenter movie is for me, and that is this movie. This is the epicenter of really a huge part of my interest in Lovecraft. Like, I discovered this film and Lovecraft's work at the same time when I was like in either late middle school or early high school, and things spiraled out from there. So I feel like this film's only, at least for me, improved with age and time and repeat viewings. But you two have both seen it, Jarrod and Doug, for the first time.
Yes.
So, do you read Sutter Kane?
I do not, unfortunately.
I don't read horror trash.
I can see. He sees you.
When you're saying it's like, oh, this is so influential on me, like, oh, I can totally see that, and I completely see why. I think a hurdle for me going in is that I have seen so many other Lovecraftian inspired, air quotes, Lovecraftian inspired movies. Seeing this was like, I kind of felt I knew more what to expect going in. Whereas if I didn't know anything about Lovecraft, it would have blown my fucking mind, like, way more. So for me, I'm just like, it felt like a more familiar tune, like someone who knows what they're doing, making a Lovecraftian movie but I felt like I could understand the beats more, like I could anticipate it, not to a negative degree, but it was like, I'm jealous of your younger experience of seeing it without really understanding Lovecraft or being exposed to that and having that, because I'm just sort of like, oh yeah, this is a Lovecraft movie.
I think it was also important that I had not seen a David Lynch film aside from Dune up to this point.
Right. So like, if this had happened at much like yourself, if this happened at an earlier time in my life, I think it would have been like a much huger impact on me. As it stands now, I think it's cool. Certainly seems to understand the Lovecraft thing more than a lot of it. Like, there's the Call of Cthulhu silent movie, was good, and I haven't seen like Dagon and Castle Freak or any of those others.
I mean, like, I suppose this distinction here, especially in the continuum of the Cthulhu Cthommentary things, is this is the first thing we've done that is in no way an adaptation of anything.
Right.
Yeah, not directly.
Not directly. Indirectly, there's a lot going on.
But that to me is what made it still cool and fresh and interesting, is like, this is someone doing a Lovecraft story without actually adapting something. Mm-hmm. So swimming in the mythos of it and really getting the spirit of it, and without just directly copying it. So I really dug that, and some of the creature design was like, especially towards the end, everything that was all fantastic, and I was just like,
save it for the end.
Yeah, and I get that like we could only see so many glimpses of it because probably in reality it's just a guy hobbling in a suit, but they really made it work like really well.
There was literal Lovecraftian obscurity happening.
Yeah,
to
the point where even me as the viewer, I'm like, oh, is that a guy in a suit? Oh wait, that's like animatronic. But they're cutting so well between like what is either person in a suit or animatronic or mixture of the two, and then you think you can, like, at one point I'm like, oh yeah, that guy's like running, hobbling on whatever, but then it cuts to another shot and it's like all part of one large mass. I'm like, you know what, I don't know what I'm seeing, and that's the point. Like, you can't make sense of it.
I was definitely having fun just kind of digesting a lot of just the editing and visuals that they were doing to kind of create this sense of disorientation, not just for the audience but also for Sam Neill's character, as he's progressing through the film.
Love that scene in the cafe.
Yeah,
that shot of him approaching with the axe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just so nonchalant, they're just continuing their conversation. No care in the world.
I guess now is probably a good time to give an overview, because we're starting to drift into
specific details.
Details. Essentially, Sam Neill plays a guy who is a freelancer who follows up on insurance claims. If someone is claiming bullshit, he is a sniffer of bullshit, and he always gets his person. And he is so good at his job that he loves it when people play hard to get and are professionals about it. He gets brought in to work on a claim that has been made by a publishing company because a global best-selling author a la Stephen King, though Stephen King does exist in this universe, this guy outsells him, named Sutter Kane, has gone missing. They do not know where the they've heavily advertised the next book, and they do not know where it is. The editor has read some of it, but it's not done, and they don't know what to do, and they are filing an insurance claim because they stand to be out a lot of money. So Sam Neill gets roped in to basically figure out where the fuck Sutter Kane is. But in the meantime, there is such a cultural frenzy happening around Sutter Kane in the release of the most recent book, The Hobbs End Horror, that people are rioting at bookstores and stuff. There is a suggestion that you only see bits and pieces of that. Maybe, just maybe, the rumor is that these books actually do make you unhinged.
Or if you're already unhinged, that's the excuse. Like, well, they're already unstable. Because
they're reading horror books.
Yeah.
Horror books that millions and millions of people read.
Right.
So Sam Neill gets sent out along with Linda Stiles, Sutter Kane's editor, to track him down, because Sam Neill eventually figures out that Sutter Kane, who does his own artwork for the books, has left a puzzle map in the artwork, and that points to the fictional town of Hobbs End, which is essentially Castle Rock from Stephen King's books. There are many nudges in the realm of what Stephen King was and is culturally, but in terms of the actual content of the story, sometimes down to exact quotes, everything else is Lovecraft. And the story is ultimately more Lovecraftian in nature than it is Stephen King.
Although, of course, Stephen King has kind of come around in that direction in his later years anyways, considering Randall Flagg is Nyarlathotep.
Yes, and Nyarlathotep is the word of the day, because that is, if this is an adaptation of anything, this movie is an adaptation of at least the concept of Nyarlathotep speaking to people and sharing madness. This movie has, I feel, aged really well, because ultimately what happens, this journey that Sam Neill goes on, the more of the books that he reads, the deeper he goes, the more dreamlike his entire life experience is, and the more fucked up things start getting until he's losing time, until he himself, like, the movie opens with a Lovecraftian framing device where we see him getting institutionalized. And then he starts telling his story.
Yeah, an investigator investigating the missing or weirdness of another investigator.
Yes.
It's very, yeah.
In terms of like how the film has aged and the messages of the film, like I always, when I was growing up, I thought that the third act was a little weak. I didn't really get it. But in 2019, after not having seen the movie for many years, I joined up with the Losers Club, the Stephen King podcast, and you may have seen this if people have been following like Call of Cthulhu Mystery Program on social media for a while. We did a meetup at the Music Box Theater in Chicago, Illinois, to watch In the Mouth of Madness on the big screen, the first time I'd ever seen it in there. And when you're watching that film in a theater and it ends in the theater with everything that's happened in our world and our lives and everything, this is in 2019, it just landed really, 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 really hard. Insofar as that this is about the proliferation of mass media and how fiction can become truth quite easily.
Yeah, if enough people believe it.
And people can get incited, and like that, this is the fucking world that we're living in. And in the scope of this film, it is the end times. And this movie was a bomb when it came out. Not a lot of people saw it, and now it is like extremely thematically relevant to where we're living. Which is true of a lot of John Carpenter works, unfortunately.
Yeah. That was peppered all throughout, and that whole time I was just sort of like, this is like the creepiest part of the whole thing, where he's just like, you know, species can smell their own extinction. I'm like, this is creepy enough. Like, we don't even have to see a monster. Like it's too real.
Yeah, and especially because as that stuff starts really coming in, you start really getting a sense of what is actually like happening and what it feels like. The movie has already started getting edited in a way that makes it more and more dreamlike.
Yeah.
Like, John Carpenter is not David Lynch. Like, when you watch the dreamier David Lynch movies, I often ask myself, how is it possible that he has, like, composed something that feels this much viscerally like actually having a dream? And this movie doesn't really do that, but maybe it's a certain kind of dream. The kind of dream that you get stuck in and you wish you weren't inside of, and you just can't seem to shake it.
Yeah,
the narrative keeps bubbling up again and again and again. This is, I can't remember what year Lost Highway came out, the David Lynch film, but, like, this is probably the closest thing that, in terms of like a narrative that gets squishy and starts kind of warping you as the viewer's own perception about what's happening.
Yeah.
This is the closest John Carpenter's probably ever going to come to that. It was around the same time.
I think a lot of it is like John Carpenter is telling discrete stories. Like, this is, it's not even a thing that he wrote, not this one.
Right, which is surprising because obviously he and Stephen
Yeah.
King have a relationship. He and H.P. Lovecraft's work, like it all plays off each other.
Yeah, but then like David Lynch is more of like a, I don't know. The script is probably like tertiary importance to him.
Yeah.
Of like the story that he's telling. He's more about like the shot compositions and characters and things like that. And then a movie kind of bubbles up out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably lends itself to more that dreamlike quality, whereas this is more of like a discrete exercise by John Carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially with the special effects and everything. Like, you have to know what you want to get when you have this much stuff in play.
Mm-hmm.
The writer, by the way, is Michael DeLuca, which is weird.
Mostly known for just producing.
Yeah, a very, very prolific producer. However, in terms of King's Dominion, he did write the screenplay for Lawnmower Man.
Huh.
Make of that what you will. And then also in terms of the sci-fi horror, he has 4 credits for screenwriting: Lawnmower Man, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, In the Mouth of Madness, and Judge Dredd, the 1995 one. Make of that what you will. But if you look at his production credits, holy shit. Like, some of the best movies of the past 30 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know really anything about Michael DeLuca, aside from, like, I've seen his name flash in the front of a lot of films.
He actually did a interview show with Hollywood screenwriters in the vein of Inside the Actors Studio.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
And he was very much, at least if the show was to be believed, an advocate of, the writer being like key to the process, and that's trying to use his sway as a producer to be like, hey, we need to give more credit to like writers because if they're not good and the script's not good, the movie's not going to work. Mm-hmm. So it was I'd seen several of those when I was going to college and like trying to get more into the mindset of how does a studio system work, where does a writer fit in with all that, and it was really refreshing to see someone with that kind of authority deferring to writers and kind of fanboying out over the people that he would interview and meet.
I feel validated now.
Yeah. And other than that, just obviously an impressive pedigree of films that he's produced as well.
This movie has a great cast. Sam Neill is the main character, John Trent. Julie Carmen plays Linda Stiles, the editor. And then there's it is stocked to the brim with character actors you've seen from other things. Everybody is somebody. Charlton Heston has a bit part for seemingly no apparent reason, but sure, he's fine in it. Hayden Christensen, his film debut. You see his actual face not even remotely as much as you see him wearing some regrettable age makeup.
Which looks coincidentally like John Carpenter.
It has a hair pattern. Yeah.
His age makeup looks like present day John Carpenter.
Yes.
It is very strange. Doug, there's a Ghostbusters connection here.
The dude's mug is plain as day. I just was I kept wanting to make it's the buzzing the fly is doing, but every moment was inappropriate. I was interested in seeing how the scene progressed and what was happening, because every time he showed up, bad things happened.
This is wild. This is the only other major on-screen performance of William von Homburg, the actor who plays Vigo. So
it was cool. It was cool to see him and then not be the villain, but still be creepy guy. But he's just local farmer
color.
guy.
Yes, local color.
Yeah, that was cool. It's if the world ever needed to do a deep fake for Vigo for a future
We got a
Ghostbusters
little bit
movie,
more
he
material.
got more material than mine from. Right? It's different sides of his face, not just the straight on. But that was a fun treat. And then seeing John Glover being in it, all these character actors popping up throughout the entire thing. It was a kind of a who's who of spooky movie stuff.
Luke, when did you see this film for the first time?
Probably in college. It was kind of a thing where I hadn't seen it before, but I'd heard of it. Somebody just mentioned it specifically because I had actually started running the Call of Cthulhu RPG. And somebody was like, oh, you'd probably like this movie then. And that was when I saw it for the first time.
Cool.
Seeing it again in a review. It holds up pretty strong, and there's just a few scenes in it that are just really iconic and burned into my memory.
Yeah.
Like that scene early on with the axe wielding agent.
Yeah.
I just absolutely love that scene. And then just that whole end sequence when he leaves his cell.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the agent scene, because it is breathtaking, and I think about it all the time. It's Sam Neill having a conversation with a colleague. They're at a diner. It's a two-shot. They're on either side of the screen. And in the background, they can't really hear what's going on or anything. They're not paying attention. A guy who, I can't remember his name, but a well-known character actor in a bunch of things with a really wonderful, deranged face, is crossing the street holding an axe,
towards the camera. Yeah.
Panic and everything, and then just smashes the screen in half with the glass in front of them, and then leans in with, the movie has not established what it's about at this point.
Yeah.
They literally just established that author is missing.
Yeah.
The way he gets up on that table and just kind of nonchalantly crouches down to ask the question.
And then it cuts to his face, and you can see that he's got these contact lenses in, which make him appear to have two merged pupils.
Or as though it's almost like a cell splitting.
Yeah.
Very much like a cephalopod's eyes.
Yeah.
And then following that, Sam Neill's character goes to the publisher, and he's like, "Oh yeah, the agent, you met him. He was the axe wielding maniac." And at that point, I'm just like, "Oh shit, this movie's buckle up," because they're going all in.
And did Sutter Kane ever tell you that his favorite color is blue? Because that's the color of the eyes. It's the color of a bunch of different important things. Yeah. There is some really profound Lovecraftian architecture in here. I'm not talking about non-Euclidean. I'm just talking about disturbingly symmetrical things.
Yeah. Was that church a real place?
That was a real place.
Where is that?
It's in Ontario.
Whoa.
There is this.
Better burn it to the ground. That is the evil church.
Yeah, a really incredible visual that you see it and you're like, well, that has to be faked, but I have no idea how it's done.
Yeah.
It is not faked at all.
Yeah.
And an ominous church in a vacant field.
Yeah.
It's legitimately real life creepy. Then I don't know what. Tell me about the person who designed it. Did they kill themselves?
Yeah. First time I saw that, I was like, "Oh, that's a weird matte painting to do." But
they just
really
keep,
cool looking church.
They keep moving towards it, and they go in
it's
the
real.
doors. It's like, oh my gosh,
You see, this Orthodox monk, he went insane after designing this church.
he's somewhere down there buried in the catacombs.
I guess for anyone who, for some reason, started listening to this, hasn't seen the film, this is like a...
onion-domed Russian
Did you say it was Byzantine
Orthodox,
style
yeah,
kind of thing?
Just Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah.
Out of place in New Hampshire.
I love the progression of this and how it's really well plotted in terms of Sam Neill's character being someone whose job and passion is to sniff out liars.
Yeah.
And finds it virtually impossible to believe anything impossible that's happening to him. Whereas Styles, who he's traveling with, she likes being scared, she likes horror stories, and the fact that all of a sudden she's seeing a bunch of things that are not just from Sutter Kane's books, but are in the unpublished book that she can't rationalize at all.
Yeah, pretty much immediately accepts that something crazy is going on.
Yeah, and that's the logical thing to do. But for Sam Neill, the logical thing is to figure out how this is a situation with a bunch of paid actors.
Yeah.
How all of this is some kind of crazy promotional scheme that the publisher is putting on. He is fighting his own insanity the whole time by virtue of his not wanting to believe something that is actively insane. And that protects him up to the end when he effectively like commits suicide, embraces oblivion by watching the film version of In the Mouth of Madness.
I really felt that the beginning and end for me are like the by far strongest parts of the entire thing.
Yeah.
And there's a good like 20-minute segment in the middle where we're just kind of going to other weird thing just so that we can say that he's experienced so many ridiculous things that we, the audience, are convinced that something supernatural is going on, and we're no longer on Sam Neill's side. And I felt a little tedious, but didn't ruin the movie. It's just that the beginning and end are so strong that the Stephen King aesthetic pales by comparison to how strong it begins and ends for me.
It does meander, and it seemingly meanders on purpose, just to establish like a mood.
Yeah, the inescapability of it, you know.
Yeah, there's some intense repetition, and that's where you really start to watch him go mad. Like when he continues to he drives the car, trying to leave the town, and ends up back in front of the mob again and again, until he finally is like, okay, fuck it, I'm gonna drive through the people. That doesn't make any sense, but I'm gonna do it. But even still, he still is trying so hard to consider the possibility that maybe he's insane, but the rest of it isn't true.
Right.
We should probably talk about the Nyarlathotep aspects of this, Luke.
Yeah, I actually happen to be wearing the shirt, which is funny. Like that wasn't intentional. So yeah, I mean, like in I guess kind of like the Lovecraftian stories, like H.P. Lovecraft himself and writers that have come since. Now, Nyarlathotep is kind of the great old one or outer god that really is the one that actually cares about humanity in some way. And it's not a good way. Like, Yog-Sothoth is time and space. And that's, you don't really have a relationship with that. Shub-Niggurath is this, like, primal force of fecundity and life and death and things like that. And Nyarlathotep is a servant. Nyarlathotep serves the will of the blind idiot god at the center of the universe. And I guess has plenty of time on its hands to regret its station in life and take that out on lesser beings. And very much is like kind of in the vein of like a trickster god, like a much more malevolent like Loki or Coyote or something. When he shows up, it's often in the context of abusing authority in some kind of way, like the Black Pharaoh, where it's this dark figure that is just horrible, worst thing you could imagine a pharaoh to be, murderous entity. And or one of my favorite actual like written by Lovecraft stories is Nyarlathotep, the short story itself, where it's in modern day he just shows up. And actually it has a lot of kind of thematic aspects with Sutter Kane himself, where Nyarlathotep shows up and just goes on a speaking tour, and people go in and they watch all of these fantastical sights that Nyarlathotep has to show people, and then they leave permanently changed. And the world is slowly unraveling because of that. And that's, I think, very much kind of the essence of what this movie is. And I don't know that it, directly that's necessarily what he was going for, because, with it, John Carpenter didn't write this himself. But I don't know if the writer kind of came in with that idea or elements of that, or if it's just a good kind of story to tell. But there's definitely elements of that there.
The more I watch this movie, the more I think that the Nyarlathotep short story comparison has to be a driving force behind this. It was kind of like someone read Nyarlathotep and was already like keyed into Stephen King's work and thought, well, gosh, Stephen King loves Lovecraft. Lovecraft, like what about like think about the proliferation of knowledge? How this small time writer, like his work has like already like changed fiction and horror and so forth. Like it's a snowball effect. Then it gets in the hand of somebody like Stephen King, and it gets further proliferated. And what if that was a psychological agent that could actually undo reality? Like it's easy to be dismissed until all of a sudden everyone is engaging with it and really seeing how mass media proliferates ideas. The same way that the Hays Code changed the kinds of stories that we could tell in America in the 1930s, creating the world that all of us grew up in, where we had been in this like whitewashed, completely warped idea of what like life and this country is.
Cowboys are good. Indians are bad.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Cowboys are also mostly white people.
Yeah, yeah.
The layers of how that like that thought control, like how it seems banal, but it is in fact extraordinarily insidious. Like that cannot be overstated. I know it's an idea that has been explored many times in many different ways, but when you actually look at the timeline, when you actually see that the media that was being created before these like sexist, racist, nationalistic laws were put in place to control what our media could and couldn't do, it goes from being reality to not reality, not reality, not reality. That's what happened to all of us, and we're trying to still like tear that veil. And it's getting worse because now we live in a world where there are people that we live next door to who do not have any semblance of history or really perceive reality. They will believe what the box tells them to believe, or the rectangle, as the case may be, and they will let their realities be warped. They will not get any further context. They believe what they are told, and they do the thing, and they react. And, I'm not even sure in terms of like, even in the scope of just how things have changed since this film came out, like, were there like riots at bookstores over media and stuff like at that point in time? Like, was any best-selling author actually causing that kind of like chaos that's reminiscent of things we've seen in our lifetime?
Probably not, but I think like if you're making a horror film, you would look at people waiting in line for a Stephen King novel and say, wouldn't it be crazy if H.P. Lovecraft was alive today? And, I think you could see a logical progression of like, would it be great, the fervor, take it to the extreme. What does that look like? And that's In the Mouth of Madness.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like what product has been released in our lifetime where people have
iPhone.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Mickey D's Szechuan sauce.
Yes.
Ooh, that's more timely. And
turned him to a pickle. Funniest shit I ever saw.
But the final Harry Potter books, people driving by trolling people, spoiling endings and stuff, and having mental breakdowns over it. Like the handful of people who committed suicide after seeing James Cameron's Avatar.
And we live in a world, especially being here in Orlando, where the fanaticism surrounding people's love for the Disney brand, the Disney company, is very eerie and very strange, and has completely eliminated my capacity to, like, when friends come from out of town and be like, I'm gonna go take my kid to the parks, I'm like, oh boy.
Have fun.
Like, I mean, like, I appreciate the craft of the Imagineers, but it got really disturbed. It became a church and it got really disturbing. And it's getting worse.
It's because it is.
Yeah.
Just pull the veil off, and just every product is in itself a religion. And so that angle that Sutter Kane was talking about is true.
Yeah. There were plenty of things that they could have been inspired by in the creation of this film and the script and everything. But good grief. Our reality is emulating like worst case scenario predictions of things. And in that way, that also feels very Lovecraftian in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were all kind of reaching for examples of like what mass thing, but what about Black Friday?
Oh,
like,
sure.
That's been a thing for a long time. And I think every time anyone sees that, like any normal, some air quotes, rational person sees Black Friday, they go, this country is insane. Like, this is insanity.
That is where you see violence.
We're seeing the end times. Yeah.
It cannot be overstated that like the power of stories and the power of words and the power of like what we put out in the world.
Stravinsky's Rite of Spring triggered a riot.
It's true.
And that's like fancy folks totally losing their shit because they were just not prepared for it.
So lewd. It's about fornication in the springtime. Disgusting. plants and animals do it, it mustn't be something for humanity to celebrate.
It's like, it's classical music. You put that picture in your head. It's like you're just mad at yourself.
I have a question. Do you think that John Trent is a fictional character in his own reality? Or do you think he's somebody who, like the editor, was manipulated? Like, where does reality start and stop?
I think this is an example of a film character becoming aware that he's a film character.
Yeah.
Like at first you're like, okay, this is the book that he's writing. But by the time you get to the end, you're saying, no, it's quite literally the movie based on the book. So it's almost like he's even an extra step removed from John Trent.
Yeah.
So that's the chaotic futility of it all.
John is imprisoned in many regards. He gets trapped in the town. He gets trapped in the confession booth. He gets trapped in time loops. He gets trapped in so many different ways. And then he realizes like he has always been trapped in the rectangle of our screens.
Yeah. And even if you think about it in the beginning, he's like, I'm not crazy, because he knows what he is. And he knows this is a fiction. But much like what the assistant said was, well, if you're sane and everyone else is crazy, now you're the crazy one. Like, so that it was very aware of what it was doing and placed all those things in a row nicely.
It's also interesting because that's a component of Twin Peaks that wasn't as clearly a component of Twin Peaks until The Return happened. But here's John Carpenter doing a similar thing.
Yeah.
In a dreamy space.
Yeah.
Much earlier.
Also about mass media and about, the power of it. And yeah, this and Fire Walk with Me would make one heck of a double feature. Like, people would be miserable. They would go home.
Well, or they just would cease to exist.
Yeah.
They just shake in their chairs until...
Yeah.
Another thing that this kind of ties back to and has elements of that Call of Cthulhu fans and a lot of latter-day Mythos fans will appreciate is there's a lot of similarity and elements of The Repairer of Reputations, which is the first story from The King in Yellow by Chambers. That's a little more kind of like what you were talking about with a society gone mad. That whole story, you can't really tell what's happening exactly because it's obviously a very unreliable narrator. But it's about all of these interactions with this play, which within that story it's a play. And in some of the other stories, the King in Yellow is an entity, but in this case it's the play, and that's actually kind of why it's so famous as a play at King in Yellow, and that affects people, and the society that the writer lives in is just this dark, twisted dictatorial America that has suicide booths on the street corners and things like that. Anti-Semitism run rampant and all kinds of stuff like that. And the main character kind of has a tenuous grip on what is or is not real within his world. Because of that, you also don't really know what's happening exactly within his story either, because you don't know what is him embellishing to the people that he's kind of telling his story to, or what is, him telling the truth as it actually is. Kind of like the same arc that Trent has in this, where he's being interviewed, and the whole movie is basically the telling of his interview.
That's a very interesting comparison that I don't have a framework for because I have not read The King in Yellow in spite of Lot X. I mean, because if I did, then what happened to Oswald happened to me, and I can't have that happen. Interesting production notes on the side. This was written in the late 80s, and there were two other directors attached to it. Initially, it was offered to John Carpenter, but he turned it down. There were two directors attached to it before Carpenter ended up cycling back around and doing it. One was Tony Randall, who's best known for Hellraiser 2, aka one of the most surprising pivots in horror sequels, and Mary Lambert. In 92, she did Pet Sematary 2. Interesting horror and Stephen King connections.
I feel like Stephen King is so prolific, it's hard to avoid any, especially if you're writing a story about a horror novel, a horror novelist, rather.
And at that time, anything between that, mid 80s into the 90s period, that was unstoppable force.
Yeah.
Cast a long shadow.
Yeah. I mean, heck, John Carpenter before this did Christine, which is one of Stephen King's movies. And I guess like the book was out and then they started filming right away. That was a back-to-back thing where he was already pretty well established at that point, to where they're yeah, we're already going to make a movie out of this.
I mean, that kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in The Mouth of Madness, when they're like, oh yeah, the movie's coming out 6 months after the book is released, and the movie poster says directed by John Carpenter.
Yeah.
So it's very,
Yeah. I really like that line at the end where they're talking about it. Like, and one of the things is like, well, what about people that don't read? Well, the movie's coming out next week.
Yeah, yeah.
And the eerie discussions about how, like, 10 years from now, humanity is going to be like a sad, weird little bedtime story that gets told by the rest of the universe. Because, like, anything that's left from this will not survive. Bleak. It's bleak. It's very bleak.
I think the scary, to me, the creepiest thing about those scenes in the insane asylum is the detective who's asking these questions by omitting any response to what Sam Neill is saying about the outside world. You get the sense that this detective already kind of believes him going in, that something crazy is happening, and then so by the time you get to the end of the movie, he's just like, well, that's my story, blah blah blah, and as he leaves, John Glover's like, so did he say anything? He's like, no, nothing important. And you're like, the delivery of it is very very much just like, yeah, I wonder what he did after he left, whether he thought the world was fucked, or if just this was one crazy day.
He had a taste of his service revolver in the parking lot.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, no, that story checks out, you know.
Do you ever let sanity rolls burn for a little while, Luke? Like, you ever had a situation where someone's, like, failed their roll, like that guy failed his roll just then, but, like, he gets out of the building? It's not like a boom, immediate reaction. It's like a slow, painful realization as the quiet places in his head get filled up with things that shouldn't be there, and there's only one way out. How do you feel about slow burn sanity losses like that on a technical level?
Well, it's hard to do because you usually want to keep things going. Like,
yeah,
I guess to get to GM chat for a second.
Sure.
But sanity rolls aren't something that can be really super scripted necessarily. Like, I mean, you know when they're likely to come up, but you don't know who's going to fail them, and you can end up with wildly different kinds of characters that you don't necessarily all want to have the same results for. So it's kind of a thing where, you know, there's always the random rolls option, but for sanity rolls, I tend to prefer to kind of use a combination of tools. Like sometimes I'll just use random. Sometimes I'll ask the player what they think. And if I trust the players generally, I'm going to let them ride with it if they kind of understand the basics of it. But I think it really depends on who you're playing with and what kind of game you're running.
How many games have you run where the literal end of the world happened? Not just TPK or everyone goes crazy, but rather like, no, they're here and that's the end. Out, in the Mouth of Madness.
So I just finished up a pulp game. I had been running it for like a year and a half. They got to the end. The Serpent Sorceress was sort of playing them. But they decided, I guess, her plans for the end of the world were the best they were going to get. So the world didn't end, but everybody got turned into serpent people.
Okay, well, sure. Society definitely changed then.
Yeah. Especially if you're dealing with 1930s. It's interesting to think. Yeah, how would Nazi Germany handle it if they suddenly all became serpent people? What would Stalin think about that?
Yeah.
They'd all be really into snake jazz.
Oh yeah. We kind of ended on the result of that though, but and they presumably kind of had places along with the Serpent Sorceress responsible, but. I had another game where they went through the whole game doing good, ups and downs. Sometimes people get killed and brought back to life. All kinds of things like that happen. But eventually in the big final battle, they had their spell that they needed to contain everything. But somebody blew all their magic points beforehand, the one who knew how to cast the spell. And then they got stomped to death by the Sphinx, which was, up and walking around. And we kind of ended with that, but, presumably it's not the full-on end of the world. It's just the Sphinx goes on like a Godzilla-style rampage.
So it sounds like the start of the end.
Yeah, exactly.
All of Cairo is their litter box.
In all honesty, now that I think about it, like usually that's the realm of like one-shots.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I've only... most of the one-shots, I can't really think of anywhere that's happened. It's mostly just been, like those two campaign examples.
Surprisingly kind of you.
I'm sure the dice have a lot to do with it, too.
No doubt.
I think if you're a fan of Call of Cthulhu or Lovecraft in general, specifically, I mean, the Mystery Program, you're listening to this, you have to be, and you haven't seen The Mouth of Madness, I think you should.
I'm sorry we ruined it for you.
Yeah, it's like, you make it all the way. Spoiler alert to get to this late in the thing, but yeah, you should. I had no real good reason why I delayed seeing it myself for so long. Just, I guess.
So we could share this moment, Doug.
Sure, but yeah, no, if you're into it, this is like lockstep. Like this is the same stuff. Go for it.
Yeah, there's the first movie I ever made was a short film in high school called Shatter Dream that was fueled by, let's say, 3 significant things: In the Mouth of Madness, Phantasm, and me struggling to process being trans and not realizing that's what was happening. So I'd say that In the Mouth of Madness is a very specific part of my DNA that is pretty integral to the existence of Mystery Program. And
so like you watching back on that old stuff, it's kind of like you as Sam Neill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at some point you realize that the world that you've been living in is a complete fiction, and you either choose to make your own reality and become your own god like Sutter Kane did, or or you keep living in the dream, which is not a good dream. It's a living in the nightmare.
Because if you stay in the dream, it turns into a nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very bad analogy, but I'll commune with the writhing things in the darkness and step through into my own power. Yes, I'm not going to hurt anybody in the process, but I will open their minds. I will put their face to the manuscript and have them read. I mean, ideally, it would be consensually. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Lovecraftian cinema.
And remember, this is reality.
If you say so.
With a twist of the dial, I cease to exist. Sure, you turn your dial back to WIS and there I am bringing you jazz and conversation as always. And you might imagine that when you're not listening to me, I am indeed still sitting here, or perhaps at home, or meandering down some snowy avenue, but are you sure? You've been told how radio works, that my voice is traveling through the ether and is being summoned forth by this apparatus just like magic. You may just as well have been told that I'm some sort of benign god speaking to you in sweet music and mellow tones. It just so happens that this device performs the ritual to summon me, so you don't have to eat those peculiar mushrooms to hear the voices. Perhaps there's some radio technicians and hobbyists out there narrowing their eyes at me. You know how this works. Well, so did the Druids, my friends. The point of the matter is this. You may suspect that I'm flesh and blood because I tell you the story of my existence. And I suppose I tell myself the story of my existence too. I believe I exist. And belief is a powerful thing. A lot of people have done beautiful and horrible things lit by the spark of belief. But just because this little voice in the box goes on believing its existence doesn't mean that it's true. As far as you know, every time you touch that dial, click me on or off, I'm gone. And when I come back, I'm just telling you the story that I persisted in the interim. We may never know. But then, perhaps you'll see me down at the automat eating a chicken salad sandwich and realize that a certain radio personality's just been reading a little too much scientific discourse. Though that hypothetical is, again, a story. But if you're here, in this place, at this time, not by accident, but by will, then one thing we know for certain is that you like stories. And perhaps the story of stories. If you enjoyed this Arcane Advent, there are more stories in store for you at CthulhuMystery.com/support. Become an initiate via either Patreon or supporting cast, and the Omniverse team's further adventures through Lovecraftian cinema will be yours. Perhaps you enjoy peering through crevices to see what mysteries await. If so, then you're sure to delight in their discussion of the film Glorious, in which a man has a fated encounter in a turnpike toilet, and existence as he knows it spirals into a dark hole. Allow me to give you a peek, then, into the further secrets our hosts found in this dimly lit stall.
I went into this thinking this was going to be the first thing aside from In the Mouth of Madness that wasn't directly inspired by a specific Lovecraft story. But then I read a weird little factoid that says, based on the short story Out of the Eons by American writers H.P. Lovecraft and Hazel Held. And there was a couple things about that statement that I was like, wait, what, really? I'd never heard of Out of the Eons, which surprised me. And then I looked up Hazel Held and unearthed a whole bunch of things regarding Lovecraft that I didn't know. Having looked it up, I'd say that saying that it's based on this story is completely wrong.
I would say that there's like a paragraph in there in the story that I can read it off.
Please do. This is a can of worms, and we're going to get into this can of worms.
That story ties back to the very first mystery program in kind of a way. One of the big things that shows up in that is Von Junst's nameless cult, which I will never, ever forget Brandon pronouncing. But it comes up a lot in here.
We're going to be talking about Glorious, but we're also going to talk about the unexpected relationship between H.P. Lovecraft and a female writer of weird stories in the 1930s.
If that delights and intrigues, then you'll be equally thrilled to discover what waits in The Haunted Palace, the first major motion picture to adapt the work of H.P. Lovecraft and introduce the world to the town of Arkham, that dreaded book, the Necronomicon, Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, and figures and concepts that are perhaps commonplace now, but rendered in a time long, long before that sinister mythology had taken hold in the collective unconscious. An important piece of history, and a story that oughtn't be lost. Again, that's CthulhuMystery.com/support to help make future mystery programs and macabre meanderings from our creepy crew, who need you, just as I need you, to sustain our existence. Now, a new year beckons, and with it the promise of fresh starts and the chance of a better year than the one that came before. I'll see you there, on the other side, and with further stories in tow to surprise and delight. But for now, my reality ends. And will it...
Thanks for listening to the Call of Cthulhu Mystery Program. This series is made possible thanks to the generous support of our producers, Amber Devereaux, Becky Scott Bailey, Bob Hogan, CB, Joe Tank Ricciardelli, Josh King, McDribble Deluxe, Miola MK86, Patrick Webster, Sean Hutchinson, Sean T. Red, and our executive Patreon producers, Big Bad Shadow Man, Marcus Larson, and Jamieson Malone. You can join the team at CthulhuMystery.com/support. And if you enjoy this podcast broadcast, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or Spotify. The Call of Cthulhu Mystery Program is recorded and produced in Orlando, Florida, and Louisville, Kentucky, on land stolen from their indigenous people, the Timucua and Seminole, and Shawnee, Cherokee, Osage, Seneca Iroquois, Miami, Hopewell, and Adena. Acknowledgement of the first people of these lands and the lasting repercussions of colonization is just the beginning of the restorative work that is necessary. Through awareness, we can prompt allyship, action, and ultimately decolonization. For links to aid indigenous efforts and to learn more about the First Nations of the land where you live, visit CthulhuMystery.com/landback. Our original score is composed and performed by Ryan McQuinn and Mike McQuinn of Neon Dolphin, home for all your custom music needs and more, neondolphinmusic.com. This has been the Call of Cthulhu Mystery Program. Good night.
Omniverse.